Okay, I think we can start. Can you hear me? Okay. So, magandang hapon po sa ating lahat, no? At sa mga anong tawag dito, audience, sa mga dumalo dito sa ating webinar. Okay. Ang webinar na ito ay Perspective, Interdisiplinaryong Talakayan ng mga isyung napapanahon. Handog ng Kolehiyo ng Agham Panlipunan at Pilosopiya, College of Social Science and Philosophy ng Universidad ng Pilipinas, Diliman, Philippine Social Science Review, the UP Department of Political Science, at ang UP sa Halalan 2022. Ang ating paksa sa hapong ito ay pinamagatang ang balota at ang masa. May pag-asa pa ba? Okay, dahil nga nalalapit na ang eleksyon, okay, hindi lalagpas sa 3 linggo ay pipiliin na natin ang susunod na mga mamumuno o mga opisyal ng ating pamahalaan mula sa pinakamataas sa Pangulo hanggang sa lokal na antas. At kasama natin ang ilan sa mga kasamahan natin sa kolehiyo upang magbigay linaw sa ilang mga katanungan, no? Pero bago natin mapakinggan ang mga pahayag na ito, no, ang mga diskusyon, ay atin munang tatawagin ang para bigyan tayo ng nandito ba si Professor Tigno, no? Para bigyan tayo ng overview tungkol sa ano nga ba itong perspective bilang isang webinar series, no? Para bigyan tayo ng kaunting paliwanag, no? Tawagan po natin ang patnugot ng Philippine Social Science Review, si Professor Jorge Tigno. Nandito ba siya? Mukhang nawala, no? Mukhang disconnect. Ayan, dahil nga tayo ay nakaangkla sa teknolohiya. Ayan, muling nagbabalik si Professor Tigno. Muli tinatawagan po natin si Professor Tigno para bigyan tayo ng mga paunang salita at kaunting paliwanag kaugnay dito sa perspective bilang isang webinar series.
Okay.
Sir.
Maraming salamat, Rob. No? Pasensya na putol ng bigla yung aking connection. I was here already. But bilang unang salita tungkol sa webinar series na ito, perspective, ang tinutukoy natin dito ay yung mga pananaw ng iba't ibang mga disiplina, no? Not so much yung mga departments mismo, no? But yung mga disiplina natin sa Agham Panlipunan at Pilosopiya para talakayin yung mga iba't ibang mga issue na kumakaharap sa ating lipunan, sa ating mundo sa ngayon, no? At nakabatay ito sa konteksto na walang isang disiplina ang may hawak ng mga sagot, no? Kahit na ba ito ay bagay na may kinalaman sa events na tinatalakay ng isang particular na disiplina, ay ang paningin namin sa sa PSSR at sa kolehiyo ay hindi dapat maging monopolyo ng particular na disiplina lamang, no? Ang mga isyung kinakaharap na natin. Because I mean, we belong to this larger society, and being the disciplines comprising the social sciences, I'm sure meron naman tayong masasabi. Meron naman din tayong papel sa pagbuo ng mga pananaw na ito. Pangalawang dahilan para sa perspective ay upang mabigyan ng laman, no, yung pakay ng kolehiyo dito bilang isang premier institution ng mga disiplina ng social sciences at mabigyan ng mabigyan ng flesh yung kanyang goal na makapagdulot ng kontribusyon, makapagbigay ng kontribusyon niya sa pagbuo ng mga pananaw ng larger society, ng general public dito. Kaya maganda rin na hindi lamang mga akademiko ang nandito, although maganda rin yun, kundi yung mga miyembro ng lipunan sa kabuuan, kasama na rito yung mga civil society organizations na maaari na makatulong sa isang conversation na ito, o makinabang sa mga conversations na ito. Pinaplano ng kolehiyo at ng PSSR. PSSR, by the way, is the Philippine Social Sciences Review, which is the official publication, official journal of the College of Social Sciences and Philosophy. Ang nais namin sana ay maging regular na offering ito ng kolehiyo sa larger society. Itong perspective na ito na webinar series. And for its first offering, dahil napapanahon na eleksyon, and this is the reason why we have we are taking up the issue of the elections, or issues pertaining to the elections. Ang pangalawang webinar na pinaplano namin na posibleng mangyari sa third or fourth quarter ng taon na ito ay tungkol naman sa batas militar bilang alala sa ika-50 taon ng Declaration of Martial Law. Marami sa atin ay maaaring wala pang kamalayan nung idiniklarang martial law, at isa na rito si Rob. Pero yun, gusto namin, of course, alam na ni Rob what happened during that period. You don't have to be born during that period. Yun ang importante dito sa perspective. Hindi mo kailangan na maranasan mismo ang mga bagay-bagay para maunawaan ito. Kung hindi, ang importante rito ay mapakinggan yung mga sinasabi ng mga may alam at nakaranas ng ganitong mga kaganapan sa ating lipunan. So, hindi na ako magtatagal kasi I know that we have two very good speakers and also one very good reactor. But just to say that for this first offering, we are going to listen to the perspectives of sociology and demography, and the reaction from the discipline of poli-sci. But like I said, hindi ito monopolyo ng isa o ilang mga disiplina lamang, at iniimbitahan ko kayo, mga participants dito, na makilahok sa ating conversation for today. So yun lamang po. Maraming salamat.
Ayan, okay. Maraming salamat, Professor Tig, At gaya nga ng kanyang nabanggit, hindi ito para itong isang talastasan, pag-uusap, diskusyon ng iba't ibang disiplina upang makahanap ng tugon dito sa mga tanong ng lipunan. Okay, nakalimutan ko pala magpakilala kanina. Ako nga pala si John Robert Go, katuwang na profesor mula sa Departamento ng Agham Pampolitika. Okay. So, dumako na tayo ngayon sa una nating tagapagsalita. Okay? Interesting, ang kanyang topic. Sino-sino ang pipiliin nating senador? Okay? Popularity voting in the May 2022 elections. So, kasama natin para magbigay ng, para ibahagi, ang mga kasagutan sa tanong na ito, ay si Colleen Caryl Torres, ay isang PhD student mula sa Departamento ng Sociology. Ayan, Colleen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Sir John. So good afternoon to everyone. I'm sharing my screen as I give my introduction. if the share screen can be allowed so that I can share my PowerPoint. Thank you. So this afternoon, I shall be talking about popularity voting in the Philippines, but most of the data that or the information or the discussions that we will have will be from a review of related literature that I did in relation to popularity voting in the Philippines and some trends during the Philippine elections. Now, in relation to sociology, perhaps since the discipline of sociology does encompass politics, history even, as well as even international relations, perhaps the angle of my discussion or my talk will more encompassing towards those three fields in the social sciences. For a moment, yes. Now, firstly, when we think about popularity voting, often and later on, we're going to look at the senatorial candidates that are leading in the polls right now during the surveys. It is apparent that most of the names that we do see in the top 12 list today or at present in the senatorial race are already well-known names, as well as seasoned re-elected politicians in the Philippine legislature. So also we also see leading media personalities as well in the senatorial race in the top 12. Sorry, I'm just browsing through how to go through Zoom later. Now, firstly, maybe we can look back in the 2019 elections, and I have a trivia for the audience now. All right. So which senator or senatorial candidate was able to get a spot in the 2019 midterm election after maybe it was a close run, and he was actually one of the faster rising senatorial candidates in the 2019 elections that really rose to the top 12 due to a certain media parang he did a pakulo through his ads. Anyone would like to maybe guess? Okay, so now here to maybe show some of the results in the 2019 elections. So these were the top 12. Yes, these were the elected senators in the 2019 elections, and perhaps this is not to point towards any of our politicians. Of course, we have the highest regard for our senators, and we have the utmost respect for all our senators. But if we look at the behavior of the voting behavior of the citizenry, though, it is apparent that yes, most people would vote for someone because they saw a good advertisement, perhaps on social media, that this politician was popular per se. Now, the politician that I was mentioning earlier was actually 𝐏𝐚𝐬𝐿 Revilla. So if you can recall, Senator Revilla had an ad wherein he was dancing to a budut song, and so with all due respect, of course, there are these instances, or there are these antics in electorates, during elections, that really it really depends on the citizens as well, on how they would become swayed towards some media promotions per se. However, what I'm trying to say here is that that shouldn't be the case, right? Because the reason or the main guidepost for voting for elections is because we're voting for people due to their background, that they are, well, ideally that they are that they do have a good they have credibility, because there are some senators here who have been charged with graft and corruption but still get reelected because of their promotions. And also there is today, this election has been quite special in a way because of the role of social media, and how in our country today there has been a huge change towards how the media has been used. And we know that we are shifting to the internet. And so with social media, with TikTok and YouTube, so we can see the role as well of social media in swaying the elections and who to vote for, and how popularity voting comes into that. Now, at this point, I will show, I'm not sure how my screen is showing. I hope it's correct now. In any case, the rest of the information I shall present here are from studies, but basically let's just talk about the results now. So introduction, yes. Electing senatorial candidates who are well known is a common trend in voters' behavior in the Philippines. So this talk will discuss about research related to political campaigning in our country, popularity voting, and conclusions that can be created based on the literature on patronage politics in the Philippines. So from a paper done by Sierra in DLSU Dasmariñas, and most of these information are current. Most of these studies were published in 2022 or between 2018 to 2022. So in 2022, recently, as what I had mentioned earlier, it's quite apparent that Filipino voters are, or it's not really about being apparent, but more on the notion or the centrality of social media, of course, as mentioned earlier. So Philippine voters or Filipino voters are influenced by the media that they interact with in the internet, whether that is in YouTube, in Facebook, in Twitter, in Instagram even, and in TikTok now, and as well as the history of the Philippine candidates that they are voting for. So when we talk about history, this pertains to the background, the family background. So yes, it is as mentioned in the study titled "Of Choices and Will: Influence of Media and Historical Linkage" as a voting preference. So it was noted that, and I think this is already quite a no-brainer for us, that there is a level of name recall. That okay, so we know this candidate already because they ran before, or they're from a certain family. So that name recall still persists, and or rather that trend or that way of voting or the voting preference is way towards that trend still. And in that sense, now so yes, because of social media and noting social media and looking at the history of Philippine candidates, that can influence their decision on who to vote for in the 2022 elections. So further looking through this study done by DLSU, so it was concluded overall that voters will vote for candidates who have a better or greater background in politics. So for example, looking through some of the instances here, or some of the examples given in the study was on some comments that were given or that were noted in posts by voters. But overall, yes, voters will vote for candidates who have a better or greater background in politics. Now, moving to another trend, so aside from social media, looking at the youth. So for young people later on, Professor Elma will talk about youth voting. So what matters most to student voters? Now, in a study done by Ferdinand Anabo of Capital State University, and I believe that this is also no knowledge as well, perhaps for everyone, that the voting preference of students, students give importance to competencies. So that is, young people look at the profession of candidates. So when we look at the direction of this talk, we were initially talking about popularity voting, but apparently the youth are not as swayed, well, according to this study, students do actually look through the backgrounds of candidates. However, the youth is also varied. So we have young people who are students, but also young people who are already working and who are still in high school. But in any case, students still look at the competencies. So looking through the profession of candidates, their experience in politics, their accomplishments and priorities when voting for political leaders. Then following this, political candidates must build their image through competence and good governance to gain student votes. So moving towards another study in relation to economic voting theory. Now, okay. So as according to another study about economic voting, citizens who would actually still vote. So despite what we just mentioned about young people looking through the competencies of candidates, however, there are still voters, of course, who still vote for a senator regardless of their performance in office. So even though a certain senator has not exactly whether or not their performance in office was looking through the points now, the performance of politicians were assessed now in this particular study, and then the researchers tried to look at whether the performance of politicians influence voters' decisions in elections. So the patterns that can be seen was that yes, citizens or voters would still vote for a senator regardless of whether or not their performance, mainly because we look at, perhaps this could be accrued to name recall again. So voters would still choose a politician because they know the name rather than what they did in office. So next, all right, now let's talk about patronage democracy. So in our country, in the Philippines, we are aware and familiar of how voters or constituents do abide by a level of loyalty towards their candidates. Now, I'm pretty sure that almost all of the attendees here might have engaged in debates defending their own bets for the presidential, vice presidential, or senatorial local elections. No? So when we look at patronage democracy, so in a study done by Pipiliin and published in the Peace Research Institute in Frankfurt, patronage democracy, clientelism, and coercion still characterize the Philippine polity. So it is still apparent that Filipinos still abide by a strong sense of loyalty towards their political candidates. No? And moreover, clientelism and coercion are practices, and patrons and political dynasties are agents as well. So overall, in terms of clientelism, there is a system now that has that, well, we see that the building of, let's say, constituents, for example, for certain politicians there is a level of clientelism wherein people would help out their constituents during a certain period. It's not really just about the period, but it's more on the way that they treat, or that politicians treat their constituents, no? And there is a sense of, we're going to help out our people, so that also creates a level of loyalty towards the candidates. And so patronage and coercion enjoy high levels of legitimacy as well in our country, provided that people or voters would abide by candidates, especially if they see these candidates as good patrons or strongmen, that they see these candidates as good options for their vote, or not exactly options, but more on, they see them as good patrons. So and in that sense, they would vote for that candidate due to their perception of them. No? So as long as these political leaders appear or exert or as long as voters see them as good patrons, and as long as these political leaders not serve the interests of the electorate, then that would continue their patronage towards these leaders. Now, elite members can choose a menu of leadership characteristics and combine these to form a leadership persona. So the individuals or the leaders that are running for the elections can, of course, create a certain persona, no? Projecting, or it's not really about projection, but choosing leadership characteristics that will allow them to create a persona that voters would be that would abide, or that would be attractive perhaps for voters. So lastly, this will be the last part, or the last study that I will show now, but these are just related to elections campaigns. Now, in a research done in the American Journal of Political Science, and studying the case of the Philippines, no, it was seen that town hall meetings, no, these yung mga pagtipon-tipon sa mga barangay. So town hall meetings have a positive effect on parties' vote shares. So when political parties and political leaders, or rather volunteers even, when there are town hall meetings held in the community, that actually has a positive effect towards campaigns and increasing voters' awareness on the issues that parties campaign on. And then deliberative campaigns increase voters' awareness on the issues that they are going to push. No? So looking through the current leading senatorial candidates at present, it is quite clear that that senatorial candidate Raffy Tulfo is leading in the ranks now, and we see some of the seasoned senators as well reelected, or not really reelected because they haven't won yet, but common, or rather well-known names like Loren Legarda, 𝐏𝐚𝐠 Escudero, and we of course have actor Robin Padilla as well included here. So this can make us think of, well, it still affirms the conclusion that yes, popularity voting still is apparent in this election. And so, however, as a conclusion, maybe for me, yesterday we were doing an interview series now with DZUP, still under the political science department as well. And one of the reflections that I saw, or that I had, was that with the elections, often it's always good to always go back to, well, this is already a little bit of a segue from the main topic, that is popularity voting. But I guess, for example, a lot of us, I'm not sure with most of the audience, but a lot of people are actually joining the campaigns, volunteering and giving their time and their effort as well for the campaign. So it's always good as well that, per se, even though this is, as mentioned, a little bit of a segue away from popularity voting, but it would be also good to always look back at some of the platforms, of course, that these senators are pushing towards. For example, higher wages for workers, and perhaps better, of course, better healthcare systems. So those are some of the things that would be good for voters to remind themselves, or for volunteers to remind themselves, that we're working towards these policy reforms, especially during the pandemic. And so that can be like some sort of a fuel for the work that we're doing, that we're even this very webinar is a way for us as a university to also become part of educating people about really looking at the backgrounds of senators. So that was that's one of the main pabaon that I wanted to give the audience, that always look at the backgrounds, because I myself, I'm all for voting for someone who's not as well known, and they might not even get to the top 12, but at least for me, this person has the capacity and has the integrity to be a policymaker. Whether or not we can see them in another aspect of in development work, whether or not they win the elections. So always vote for a senator based on their background, and not just because they're popular. That would be all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Colleen, on that presentation. Okay, so we were able to look at different studies that talked about. Okay, so we have seen different studies that look at the trend in electing senators. And now, napa-English tuloy ako, no? And now, tingnan naman natin yung susunod na diskusyon, ano? Ito naman ay mula sa lente ng demografiya. Okay, navigating adulthood in uncertain times, election, pandemic, and the promise of youth votes. Atin namang tunghayan ngayon ang presentation ni Dr. Elma Laguna, na mula sa UP Population Institute. Okay.
Okay, magandang hapon po sa ating lahat. Una-muna ako ay nagpapasalamat sa PSSR at saka sa ODREP for this webinar on election. When we got the call for papers, we thought that maybe it's a good idea to present the initial result of the Young Adult Fertility and Sexuality Study, looking specifically at the young voters. That is what I will share with you today. In line with the webinar's theme, ang balota at ang masa, may pag-asa pa ba? My presentation is entitled Navigating Adulthood in Uncertain Times, Election, Pandemic, and the Promise of Youth Vote. So I have three main objectives in this presentation. One is to provide a profile of the Filipino youth, specifically the voting age population 18 to 24. The profile will cover geographic distribution and mass access and use of ICT on social media. Second, we will also explore what we call the key milestones in young people's lives: schooling, employment, family formation, and political engagement or participation. And finally, I will present young people's attitude on several issues such as marriage, divorce, abortion, access to government health services, and use of contraceptives and condom. So as mentioned, this is the first presentation of the latest young adult fertility and sexuality study data. The UP Population Institute, together with the Demographic Research and Development Foundation, have been conducting the National Survey on Young Adults and Youth, age 15 to 24. And this is already the fifth in the series of YAP study from 1982, 1994, 2012, and now 2021. So the conduct of the 2021 YAPs was made possible through the funding support of the Department of Health. So what is YAPs? No? It's a nationally representative survey of Filipinos aged 15 to 24, and it covers topics related to fertility, sexuality, and reproductive health, as well as non-sexual risk behaviors. We covered all the 17 regions of the country, and analysis can also be done at the regional level. Fieldwork was conducted from August 2021 to January 2022, and we have a total sample size of 10,984. I have to say, however, that the results are still preliminary. Up to a few hours ago, we were still doing the runs. Okay, just a note on the terminologies. We use the WHO definition of young adults and youth as those in the age range 15 to 24. This has been the definition that YAPs have been using, so we decided for YAPs 5 to stick with the definition. So the voting age population is 18 to 24. For this study, we have to note that we included those who will be turning 18 by May 9, 2022. Okay. Because it's election year, there has been a lot of talk about youth votes and young people's political participation. So let us start with that. Okay. Are young people a formidable force in elections? No, it depends on how we define young people. But in general, since the Philippines is a young population, it is characterized as a young population, I think it is safe to say that yes, the youth is a critical force that could shape the outcome of the election. Here we have the 2022 population projection. So we project a total population of about 111 million this year. More than a third of our population, or about 39 million, are in the age group 0 to 17. This one. The voting age population comprised the remaining 65% of the population. And in absolute terms, the number is about 72.2 million Filipinos. However, based on the Commission on Election, only 67.4 million Filipinos are registered to vote next month. And of this voting population, 19% is in the age group 18 to 24. So we can say that 1 in 5 voters is coming from this age group, the 18 to 24. Okay. So in YAPs, the 18 to 24 comprise 39% of the study sample. Remember, the age range covered by the study is 15 to 24. We asked the respondents if there are already registered voters, and among those who were 17 and 18 at the time of the survey, we asked if they plan to register, if they have not registered yet for those who were 18 before the September 30 deadline. This was asked if the fieldwork was conducted before October 1. So if we look at the overall percentage of voters registration, 78% of them were already registered voters. And 14%, I'm sorry, said that they're not registered yet, but they intend to register before September 30th or before the deadline. However, we have 8% who said that they're not registered and they're not planning to register. So if we look at patterns, we see here that there's slightly more females. Here, females who were registered voters compared to males, and this is true across all age groups. In contrast, there are more males who are yet to register, but plan to register, who are not registered but plan to register compared to their female counterparts. Okay, but the more important indicator of political engagement is the exercise of the right to vote. So we ask both registered voters and those who are not yet registered but intend to register if they plan to vote in the upcoming May election. Among the registered voters, almost all said that they will vote. And among those who still have to register at the time of the survey, 74% said they will vote. So overall, among Filipinos 18 to 24, an overwhelming majority, that's about 94%, will vote this coming election. What is the size? That's about 13 million. How are they distributed? What I mean is, where are they located? Yeah. So we see here that youth voters are located in Calabarzon, most of them, 15%, Central Luzon, 11%, followed by NCR, about 9%. And NCR. Central Visayas has 8.9% of youth voters compared to 8.7% of NCR, and Western Visayas with 7.4%. In terms of urban-rural residents, we see that there are more than 60%, regardless of gender, of our Filipino voters, young Filipino voters are residing in areas considered as rural. So as I mentioned earlier, YAPS covered a variety of topics on young people. So YAPS 5 is particularly special because it was conducted during the pandemic. So there are a lot of questions that try to differentiate experiences of young people before and during the pandemic. But unfortunately, I will not be able to present that today. Rather, I will focus on other information that will give us an idea of how young people or young Filipinos are faring. So this include findings on education, for example, marital status, employment, and social media engagement. So the pandemic started towards the end of academic year 2019-2020. We all shifted to remote learning during academic year 2020 and 2021. So in the survey, we asked if our respondents were enrolled in the school year, academic year 2020-2021. Among 18 to 19 years old, so these are our first year, second year, I think, in university or college, 9 in 10 were enrolled. Slightly more females than males. Among age 20 to 21, 7 in 10 were enrolled. And again, there were more females than males. In the older age group of 22 to 24, 4 in 10 were enrolled in academic year 2020-21, but this time slightly more males than females. In terms of employment, we see here that about 3 in 10 are currently employed. If we look at age group and sex, we see that compared to education, there are more males working than females across all age groups. So as expected, more youth in the older ages are employed. So let us look at family formation. Here we considered being in marital union. So this include cohabitation and formal marriage, either in church or civil. And we found that 18% of our young voters are already in union. Among age 18 to 19, for example, 11% of females and 1% of males. At older ages, the same pattern is also observed. More females are in union than the males, and this is to be expected since females are likely to have older partners. So what about ICT access of young voters? Majority said that they own a smartphone, and this is followed by TV and laptop. So what do they do with this gadget? Social and mass media use, they're being used for various reasons or purposes like entertainment, information, and to connect with family and friends. So for example, when they say they use it for entertainment, here they mention listening to music, watching TV shows, and playing video games. In terms of they use it as a means to get information, here we also see that 47% said they're using it for research or work-related resources, as work-related resources, and also to attend online meetings, online classes, and meetings and webinars. Social media or mass media as a form, a way to connect or communicate. Almost half, 49% said they use it to communicate with family or friends using a gadget, or communicate with classmates or workmates using a gadget. Okay, so now let's turn to attitude. How do we characterize young voters in terms of their beliefs and attitude? We ask their attitude about marriage, same-sex union and divorce, about abortion, and about accessing condoms and government provision of contraceptives to minors. So as we see, they are still conservative in their views about marriage, especially the females. 27% agreed with the statement that it is all right for unmarried people to live together even if they have no plan to marry. In contrast, 34% of males agreed to the statement. Similarly, an almost similar percentage approved the statement that it is okay, it is all right for a woman to get pregnant, even if she's not married to the father of the child. That's 23% for females and 31% for males. There's higher percentage, however, of both males and females who agreed that living together first before marriage is a good idea. Among females, it's 44%, and among males, it's more than half, 53 or 54%. What about same-sex partnership or union? More than a third of both males and females agreed that it is all right for same-sex couple or partner to live together, as well as to be legally married. What are their thoughts about marriage? Among females, 41% agreed that a couple in an unhappy marriage should separate. A slightly lower percentage of male, however, agreed to this statement. Compared to females, more males agreed that it is better to have a bad marriage than no marriage at all. So when it comes to divorce, 44% of females agree that this should be legalized, while only 39% of the males share the same sentiment. So when it comes to abortion, so in general, there is a low approval of abortion. Only 5% said that it's okay to have abortion or to approve of abortion, When asked about situation that abortion can be approved, substantial differences between men and women is observed, no? Especially in cases where the pregnancy is a result of rape, incest, and or the child may be born with deformities. In this regard, more females are said that abortion is okay. On access to condom, more than half of males said that they can get it if they want to. In contrast, a quarter of females said that they can get condom if they want to. 11% of females said that they can access contraceptive without parental consent, while 26% of males reported the same. And finally, majority of young people approve of government health services or centers providing contraceptive services to minors. Although there's a slightly higher percentage who also approve that government health centers provide contraceptive to minors if there is parental consent. So what are the main takeaways from these findings? No? One, I will just highlight some. Ownership of ICT gadget, particularly smartphone, is high among our young voters. They use mass media as well as social media for various purposes, entertainment, information, and to connect with family and friends. When it comes to how the pandemic or the uncertainty of the times affect them, we see also that young people continue to pursue education, participate in labor market, build families, as well as exercise their right to vote. So, but it should be noted, however, that only a third of our 18 to 24 are currently employed. There is also a marked difference between men and women in the selected indicators. We see, for example, that education is higher among women, but in terms of employment, they don't fare better. No? It's the men who are faring better in terms of employment. When it comes to views and beliefs, we can say that they're still conservative, particularly in their views about cohabitation, marriage, abortion, same-sex union, but there is higher support for divorce. No? They agreed also that government health centers should provide access to contraceptive services for young people. And for election-related findings, we have to take note that they have a substantial share of the population, the 18 to 24. 1 in 5 voters will be coming from this age group. And it's comforting to know that 94% of them will participate in this coming election. So the question remains, who will they vote? It depends. So that's, I think, things that we can explore further once we have the data fully processed. And there are also other topics that can be shared and research on. So expect more findings and presentation from us in the coming months. So thank you very much and have a good day. I will have to apologize. I won't be able to answer your questions during the open forum, but Dr. 𝐏𝐚𝐿 will take care of that. So thank you.
Okay. Hello. Okay. So thank you very much to Dr. Laguna for that very interesting, siguro isa sa mga takeaway doon ay marami sa atin ay hindi na bahagi ng youth kasi 18 to 24 lang ang youth according sa definition. Pero may mas mga importante tayong takeaways dyan na ating titingnan. Marami ng diskusyon sa ating chat box. Actually, kung may mga katanungan kayo, okay, pwede nyo itong ilagay sa chat box. At para naman sa mga nanonood sa atin sa Facebook Live, sa UP Department of Political Science Facebook page, no? Pwede rin kayo magkomento at maglagay doon ng inyong mga katanungan. Pero bago yan, we can go and first listen to our reactor. Ano? Ang ating reactor ay mula naman sa aking Department of Political Science, no? Si Dr. Sol Iglesias. Sol, you have the floor.
Maraming salamat, Rob. Maraming salamat sa Philippine Social Sciences Review, sa UP sa Halalan at sa nag-imbita sa amin na makasama kayo ngayong hapon na ito. I would also like to thank our two speakers who have really given us a lot of food for thought. And so I think what I will just try to do is just share some responses, no, based on the variety of points that they have raised from both the literature on popularity voting, which can help us to frame some of the trends that we've been seeing in this election so far, as well as in previous elections. And then, of course, this rich empirical evidence, partial pa lang yan, but rich empirical evidence on youth attitudes, not just towards voting in this specific election, but more broadly, no, and for us to also reflect on the extent to which these sorts of positions on social and cultural, possibly religious issues, no, have any bearing on their voting behavior. So for the sort of review of popularity in voting, I think one of the key things that or some of the key things to note, just looking at the current survey results, although some surveys, looking at the Okta results that Colleen showed us, and in comparison to some of the other survey results for the same period, the results are largely the same, no? And as Colleen has mentioned, it's really well-known names that are appearing. And I did a quick back of the envelope sort of reckoning. If you look at the current slate of senators who will stay on and continue their terms in the new Senate, no? So those who were elected in 2019. And if you look at those in the top 12, based on the April 6th or around that period survey, what we will have is really a domination of not just familiar names, but the same names in the coming Senate. 2 Villares, 2 Cayetanos, 2 Binays, 2 sons of former President Joseph Estrada, and then, of course, depending on the outcome of the presidential election, if Ferdinand Marcos Jr. wins, then Marcos, his sister, will be a sitting senator, at least for the first half of his term. And looking as well at how then, some of these potential explanations of why people vote the way they do, especially for national positions and so on. Some of the factors that Colleen mentioned also had to do with the centrality of social media, for instance. So others, even in the chat, have also mentioned things like name recall as being potentially important determinants, no? It makes me wonder if the sense that I am getting both personally and as a political analyst, if the sense that I'm getting that the 2022 elections seem to be quite well, either one way of looking at it is unusual. Another way of looking at it is just simply the culmination of the sort of ongoing trend, like that sort of what Colleen has been describing, you know, like the factors that make popularity, how those factors translate into votes. And the sort of behavior that we're seeing from the Senate candidates, for instance, those of them who one pundit called them like the generic five, for example. You know, the practice of sharing candidates on across different presidential slates. This sort of guest candidate phenomenon has occurred in the past, but it seems really it's not just about guest candidature. No, it's about candidate promiscuity. They just pick and choose. They're shared across different presidential slates, and you know, the tactic seems to be working to some extent, because again, looking at the Okta survey results that Colleen showed us, it doesn't seem like there's one presidential candidate anyway that dominates, right? If any, and not even the presidential frontrunner can boast that his sort of name and you know, association with his campaign. Not even Marcos Jr. can boast that it's translating into support for the senatorial slate, for instance. And then we would also have to, probably the topic of another forum completely would be the question of how it works at the local level, right? And then of course, in this particular survey result, we see Risa Hontiveros from the second from the number 2 candidate by survey, Vice President Robredo's. She's the only person on Vice President Robredo's slate, apart from those generic shared candidates like Mr. Zubiri, for example, Joey Villanueva, Cheese Escudero, former Vice President Binay. The fact of those generic senatorial candidates, the one senatorial candidate who doesn't seem to be making any traction in the surveys, Richard Gordon, is one of those candidates who's kind of hitched his wagon already on the Robredo campaign, showing up at many of the Robredo rallies, for instance, or at least in the beginning. Okay, so yes, and then what are the larger implications, right? I think that you know, these are warning signs on one hand of like real concentrations, and not just in the Senate, right? It's you see it in local elections, you see it in the legislature, and we see it in of political opportunity among very few people. That's getting that is a serious problem in this country. There does not seem to be any serious push for democratic reform or electoral reform. And the big concern is that if the Marcos Jr. Duterte Jr. slate wins, that is a continuity ticket, right? So the democratic backsliding that we've experienced, I don't think we can rely on a continuity slate to reverse towards democratic reform, no? So some of the things that have been discussed in some of the presidential debates, like things like thinking about reforming whether or not the president and the vice president should be running on the same ticket, yung tandem voting, or enacting an anti-political dynasty law that had already been provided for in the Constitution, and those sorts of reforms. No, it's going to be a big question. What we can expect if Filipinos, the winning constellation of candidates in both the executive and legislature are not going to be a majority sort of pro-democratic reform constellation. No? So we can probably be a bit pessimistic with regard to democracy. Okay, now going into the survey, the youth survey, no, it's navigating adulthood. Findings. I mean, it's really fascinating. And I'm sure there are already a lot of questions that the audience would like to ask. I think I'll just offer a few observations. I mean, I think Elma basically made the point that the youth vote will count. It's actually interesting to see this disaggregation, because when the sort of quote unquote youth vote had been reported on in the media, it was reported on to being more than 50% of the voting population for this coming election. But actually, if you narrow the age range to 18 to 24, it is, as Elma says, looks more like one out of around 20%, right? Because I think in the previous reports referred to the youth on the UN kind of definition, which is like 18 to some early 40, like 18 to 40s, kind of an age bracket, no? So this is extremely valuable to get more fine-grained analysis of the youth vote, which is nonetheless significant, and which also, in large part, looks like it's also driving a potentially high voter turnout overall for the coming elections. And this is something that I think in the Philippines we should not take for granted. The high engagement, the high level of engagement of voters at elections is something that older democracies don't really enjoy, for instance. And this is actually a resource that probably needs to be tapped on more. And then, of course, the kind of generally conservative, socially conservative attitudes, even among the youth, except over the question of divorce, leads me to remark that the positions that the national candidates have been taking in this election, particularly the presidential ones, when it comes to abortion and same-sex marriage or marriage equality and divorce, it seems that these candidates have done their homework, except for, with very few exceptions. One exception that comes clearly to mind is the Lakas ng Masa, Laban ng Masa ticket with 𝐏𝐚𝐿 Guzman and Walden Bello. They've been clearly on the left side of these sort of social issues, or the progressive side, depending on which way you look at it, in terms of like supporting divorce, supporting a woman's right to choose when it comes to abortion, abortion and divorce, and support for marriage equality. And some of the other candidates also vary a little bit, but generally speaking, the top two candidates have hewed very close to the center. Vice President Robredo, in particular, being the lone female candidate, is probably vying with Manny Pacquiao in terms of how conservative her positions have been on these kinds of social issues. No. So I suppose the interesting thing about these findings, we can apply the lenses of not just looking at this election, but looking at policy issues beyond the election, and perhaps in terms of advocacy towards legislation in the coming new Congress. No, so there are loosening attitudes, even if it's overall still quite conservative, very surprisingly conservative. But there seems to be, more traction over the question of divorce, for instance. And there could be, some fertile ground for policy advocacy by feminist groups, for instance, and other groups that would wish to see more social liberalization in terms of policies toward the family, marriage, gender equality, and so on. Okay, I think I'll stop there for now. And again, I'd like to thank the organizers and the speakers for this opportunity to discuss these really fascinating research findings, and for us to take a sort of broader interdisciplinary view. Just how many days now before the election? Like fewer than 3 weeks before the election. Thank you.
Okay. Maraming salamat, Sol. Okay, nahimay talaga ni Sol yung mga yung presentation, at nagdagdag pa rin siya ng personal inputs niya dito. Nakita na rin natin sa ating chat box na may mga katanungan ng pumapasok, And I think our speakers are ready to respond to this. Okay, so Colleen will be responding, of course, to questions addressed to her presentation, and then, of course, because Elma is currently preoccupied, I understand yung kanyang mga colleagues will help us understand if there are questions related to her presentation. Okay. So narito, meron na tayong mga tanong. So babasahin ko lang, Saan tayo dadalhin in terms of politics and economy if this popularity voting continues to persist? Okay. And why do you think the Marcoses continue to enjoy huge popularity despite the horrors of martial law inscribed in our history and media information dramatizing their corrupt practices and outright lies? Okay, so basically, may konting discussion na dito sa chat box, pero the questions mainly ask about ano ba tong popularity voting? Ano bang magiging epekto nito sa atin? At bakit popular pa rin ang mga Marcoses kahit na yung katotohanan tungkol sa mga hindi magagandang bagay, mga masasamang bagay, pagnanakaw, korupsyon, at yung mga human rights violations na ginawa ay lantad naman sa lahat. Okay? Colleen?
Thank you, sir, Professor John. So if this continues, and definitely this might patronage politics, popularity voting might not even change in the next few years or in the next election, definitely, because it is part of the character of the Filipino people. I mean, that unless if there would be a huge overhaul towards the education system, and there are still so many aspects that are still happening now with the pandemic. So how can we even ensure that we are educating our voters to vote wisely when everyone is still recovering from this pandemic? So somehow that priority is not exactly put forward, voters ed. But the importance of voters education is, of course, very significant. So however, effects looking towards, if this continues to the next election in 2028 or in the next decade or so, we could be assured that we might be choosing the wrong people, quote unquote, the wrong people, and that especially, let's say there is a type of demographic that is majority. Well, we have the youth, which will sway the results of the elections, but basically, if we look at the Class C or Class C of the electorate, probably there's no study on that, but they do have a huge chunk as well towards who can win in an election. So in that sense, if this persists, we can be assured, not assured, but we can less credible leaders, and perhaps even the continuation of corruption because of electing corrupt people with a background. Sorry, there's noise in the back. That would be my answer. And then for the second one, or sorry, for the second question, now this debate topic would be quite interesting because personally, I would say that I also have family who also are pro Marcos, and maybe most of us have also, not sure if there are BBM supporters here as well. No, most of us might have also engaged in that debate with other people. But to note, if we don't know already, the Marcoses have invested a lot for a long time already on this campaign. Starting in 2016, I believe that campaigning started in social media, and for example, with fake news as well, with trolls. So with why are they still popular? I guess patronage politics can come in there because, for example, looking at older adults that lived through martial law, some of them went through or were recipients of the programs that the Marcoses had in the past, such as scholarships now for students. So there is a level of loyalty as well that these individuals have, but also, of course, there is money involved. That there are, for example, lawyers, people in the top ranks who have benefited from the money that the Marcoses have fueled into their campaigns, if they are politicians, into their businesses as well as I actually know some circles here in Cagayan. I'm actually calling from Cagayan de Oro, who are loyal to the Marcoses because they have they are part of the of assistance, no? So that's also another aspect.
Okay,
I also
maraming
maybe Sir
sige.
George, some of the people would, some of the professors here might also want to answer na, in any case, yes.
Yeah, okay. So actually, Sol mentioned that in the most recent Okta survey, 77% support for Mr. Marcos Jr. is among 18 to 24 years old, no? Okay. And Sir Georgie asks, is the situation really a problem of lack of information, disinformation, and miseducation, or is the problem something else entirely? Okay. Anyone who wish to respond to this question?
Okay, so I guess there is also, a level of gender dynamics, I think, because I'm sorry, I'm looking at that angle. There are some people whom I speak to in the community who I ask, why would you like to vote for like Duterte, of course, because well, it's not just about the fact that they don't want to have, well, there was actually someone who said that they don't want to have a woman leader. No, it's not Duterte, it's more on Marcos pala, Marcos versus Robredo, parang ganon, for the presidential race. And somehow they said that they don't want a woman leader because they want someone with stronger attributes. But also, this is in relation to the question on disinformation. I guess there can also be an aspect of I guess when looking at young people, for example, no, that is it disinformation or is it something else? I guess it's a mix of different factors, from disinformation to maybe even, I know some friends of mine who would opt to not vote for any person because they also want to keep their parang there's a level of pride in somehow keeping their own candidates, no, instead of jumping to more credible candidates. But on a larger note, so is it, I guess it's also about the education of not exactly teaching history, that these young people don't know what happened during martial law, and so and even with corruption, that the history of corruption.
Okay. Siguro if I may just add, no, just my personal insight. Because if you're going to look at it, maybe, of course, we're discussing Marcos, no. This has been laid down ages ago, no. If you've watched the documentary, diba, Imelda was saying that they really were talking about bringing Bongbong Marcos, I mean, to the presidency. So I guess it's part of a very huge plan. It's a very, although I would not want to give too much credit to them that they have such a very, a very clear plan of action that they will be heading towards that particular point. But I guess for them, all roads lead to Malacanang, as one of his supporters says, no, yun yung kanyang tahanan daw, di umano. Anyway, here's another question. What has changed significantly in the demographic profile of the country? Are Filipinos younger now compared to, say, 1980s or the 70s? And I guess the question of them being younger, if I may push it further, how does this younger demographic impact on matters like elections and politics and things like that?
I'm sorry, is
maybe
there a representative from the Philippine Population Institute, Sir John? No.
Yeah, can I say
yes,
something?
Ma'am Grace.
Yeah, actually, in terms of the structure of the Philippine population, we're not getting younger. It's a young population, but over time, the relative share of those in the younger ages is getting smaller. But in terms of absolute number, it's still a huge number. So generally, it's still a young population, no? But we're not saying that we're getting younger over time. In fact, we are maturing in terms of our age structure. Except that that's in relative terms. But if you look at actual numbers, we're still adding more and more people, no, like 1.8 million births every year, no? So you're adding that. But if you look at relative share, that's what I meant by we're not getting younger. The relative share of, let's say, 15 and lower is not getting bigger over time compared to 70s, 80s. It was bigger then, but over time it's decreasing. But in terms of absolute number, it's increasing because the size of the population is increasing. So the base of the population is increasing. So we have to differentiate between absolute terms and relative terms. So if you look at the age structure, that's when you say that, you know, the relative share of those less than 15 is decreasing. But the change, demographic change is relatively slow. So if you look at the patterns of births and deaths over time, you know, it's moving slowly. So the demographic change is not very drastic over time. But yeah, I hope I clarified. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Siguro may follow-up din dito, no? Ito ba ay related in any way sa internal migration, particularly with NCR no longer being a major destination area? Meron bang ganun connection, ma'am?
Actually, if you look at the internal migration pattern in the Philippines, NCR used to be the in-migration area, no? But in recent years, it has already been a net out migration area. But you see that there is a suburbanization, so people are now moving towards the areas like Region 3 and Calabarzon. So it's you're seeing an expansion of the metropolis. So it's not only NCR, but the neighboring regions that are gaining population through migration. And if you look at the profile of the migrants, there's selectivity in favor of young and, you know, those who are in the working ages, and it's already also selective of females. So these are the profile of the migrants coming to this area. So if you look at the demographics of Metro Manila area and the environs, particularly Calabarzon, Region 3, you will see that it would have a greater proportion in the younger ages, particularly those in the working ages. Also Metro Manila, because it's still the convergence of students. But if you look at other areas like, for instance, Ilocos region, that's our net out migration region, they're relatively older in terms of the population structure.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Actually, interesting yun, ano? Na kasi ang diskurso lagi, lahat daw pupunta sa Maynila. But at least, as we see recently, lumalawak na rin yung scope, hindi lang Manila, pero neighboring regions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Saturated ng Metro Manila. It's getting saturated, and the investments are already going to, let's say, Calabarzon, Cavite, for instance. That's why it's the biggest province now. Yeah.
And I think also it comes with the development of economic zones in these regions.
Yes.
So nandun yung mga trabaho.
Yeah.
Okay. Sol, you have a question. Thank you, Mama.
You're welcome, John Robert.
Your mic is
Thank
off.
you. Yeah, thank you. I'd also like to ask more about yung findings of the Population Institute on yung youth social-political behavior, no? I know, I realize that the data is still very fresh, pero based on this survey or perhaps related work that you've already done in this field, do you have some idea of why the Filipino youth seem to be so socially conservative? And I have a second question related to that, but I don't know if this is something that is within the scope of the research that you've done, or perhaps maybe this is a good area for a joint research project with political science. But my question would also be, if the youth is socially conservative, does this make them more inclined towards voting against democracy, voting for strong men, voting for, being susceptible to that kind of populism? Thank you.
Yeah, that's interesting. Oh, si Ma'am Mide.
Yes, opo. My answer will be very tangential. No, we haven't really looked at the trends. I can't remember really results much from previous YAPs. Pero one thing I can say is that, at least for example, dun sa divorce, these are higher proportions who actually are supporting divorce. We've been asking this question for the last 3 surveys. Previously, it was, I think, just 1/3 of the youth saying they're supporting divorce. Now we see higher numbers. So maybe they're still relatively conservative, but there's really a growing number or proportions of youth who are opening up, perhaps, becoming more liberal in terms of, many aspects of our lives. I won't be able to answer the second part because we didn't really have questions related to that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So, yun. So, mas generally speaking, no, parang may trend na dumadami naman yung although not exactly majority, pero may increase in dun sa divorce. Because I think, Sol, yung yung idea of social conservatism versus political conservatism, baka hindi rin siya exactly it coincides. So baka may overlapping. Of course, maganda nga yun. Actually, napaisip din ako, magandang pag-aralan siya in the future, no? Especially in the context of the Philippines, no? In terms of voting preferences.
Yeah. If I may,
and then
if
at
I
the
may,
same time,
sorry,
sige.
Go ahead. I'll just add after.
And then at the same time, ano ba yung willing silang i-give up as they support a candidate? For example, I support candidate X. May mga positions si candidate X na not necessarily I identify with. Pero gusto ko si candidate X kasi I see yung qualities that I'm looking for. So may mga ganong ding mga detalye na maganda rin makita. No? Anyway, Sol, please.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to also comment na although I mean these could probably be really interesting areas to explore in terms of research. Baka may existing research or it's possible that we can uncover some new questions. But my sort of guess, I don't know if I can even say it's an educated guess, would be that politicians don't, I mean, the mainstream, let's call them mainstream politicians, right? If you look at basically those top 12 senators in the surveys who are poised to win, like those kinds of politicians, I don't think that it's not a winning tactic to run your campaigns on these socially polarizing issues, right? Everybody is in the center, more or less, among the main candidates. They all hew towards the center on these things, no? So if you look at the presidential candidates, and if you think about yung mga debates that have occurred so far, parang ganun din, no? They are all in the center when it comes to economic policy and these kinds of social and cultural / religious policies. And then I suppose my broad Colleen might want to comment on this is yung phenomenon na nakikita natin na the basis of election basically is popularity. It's really popularity contests and not policy contests. No. How do you see it from the supply side, meaning the politicians themselves? Because the sense that I get is that it's probably in the interest of trapos, especially mga traditional politicians, who can rely on machines, their political machines in part, their dynastic sort of social capital in part, and so on. My sense of it is that it's in their interest not to turn elections into contests over policy issues, but rather keep on playing this popularity game ad infinitum. Because as long as it works for them, then they don't have to, they don't have to tackle the fundamental questions of the country, like wealth distribution, like education, poverty, and so on.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Actually, maganda yung... Yeah. Sige, Colleen, sagot. Anong sagot mo dito?
Yes, Sir Dan. So That's a good question, Professor Iglesias. For me, it would really depend as well on their interests, of course, ma'am. So, for instance, looking at some of the leading political dynasties in the different regions in the Philippines, there is a saying, or there's a theory in sociology about that relates towards keeping the uneducated so that the hegemony will continue. So I guess it is part of we're actually talking about Gramsci this week in class with Dr. 𝐏𝐚𝐿. So I could relate it towards the what's the term, the ignorance of the majority. So, well, when we talk about that dynamic, for example, perhaps the elites have their own interests, but they want the majority of the masses to remain uninformed, to remain somewhat like puppets that would just follow what is popular, just so that they can retain their wealth and their position. So that is definitely somehow like a social science theory as well. So now, how do we respond to that, though? It's either we tell others, or now that we're aware that the elites also have their interests, and whatever that interest is, are we still going to choose them? So there are other people who we can vote for, but it's going to take millions of people to vote for the people to have a change in the Senate, because obviously it's popularity voting because it's name recall, as mentioned by Professor Tigno in the chat. So in that sense, it's either will it take a whole a program on voters ed? Will it take a law that would maybe bar these same politicians from running again? It depends. So, but for me personally, I believe that sociologists, like social scientists, know these matters because we study it, but then the majority don't. So now that the majority knows that the elites have their own interests, hindi naman tayo magpapauto naman sa mga elitista. Ganon na lang siguro. Ipag-iisipan na lang muna natin.
Okay. Actually, in the process of Sol asking and then Colleen responding, napaisip din ako kasi of course ang pinag-uusapan natin national scale, pero we also have to consider na yun nga, yung suporta pa rin ng mga local na politicians hindi mo rin matatanggal So itong mga, of course, yung mga popular na, kilala na, baka sila rin sinusuportahan ng mga nasa baba, no? Kaya in terms of name recall, as Sir G mentioned in the chat box, mas madali silang maalala, no? Kasi yun nga, sila yung sinusuportahan Ngayon, kung hindi sila sinusuportahan doon sa baba, hindi sila naririnig, no? Hindi alam kung wari may sinabing pangalan ng isang kandidato, ay tumatakbo pala yun. O kandidato pala yun, hindi natin alam. So, it's a complex system, kumbaga, no? A network of relations, no? Matrix of sorts, no? Na nakakaapekto dito sa popularity voting, kumbaga. Okay. Okay. So at this point, siguro wala na ba tayong katanungan? I think at this point pwede nating tawagin ang ating kawaksing dekano no? Para sa research publication. Hindi ko memorize yung napakahaba ng title. But our associate din, si Christian, para magbigay ng kaunting mensahe. Okay? Christian Saging.
Magandang hapon po sa lahat. Maraming salamat, Rob. So on behalf of Dean Bernadette Abrera of our college, I would like to thank everyone, our participants, our audience, our two speakers, our reactor, moderator, for joining us today for our first in a series of webinars organized by Philippine Social Science Review, headed by Dr. 𝐁𝐚𝐥𝐸𝐚 as Editor-in-Chief, in partnership with Department of Political Science and UP sa Halalan. So as we have seen, this has been a very productive and interdisciplinary exchange of ideas. I hope we will see you in the next webinars in the future. Dr. 𝐁𝐿 mentioned the martial law webinar, which will be probably scheduled sometime in September or August later this year. So hopefully you can join us. And if you would like to also participate and share your insights, we would welcome your expertise. So hopefully our conversations today will not end with the webinar, and hopefully it will extend with future dialogues, especially in topics like the election, which is very, very timely. And also we hope to see this also in some form or another in print, in the pages of our journal, to kind of forward these interdisciplinary conversation and dialogue. And again, maraming salamat for joining us today. And again, we're looking forward to seeing you in future webinars. Maraming salamat sa organizers, kina Sir Georgie, kay Rex, kay Mariel, kay Charm, and to everyone who participated and made this first event successful. So maraming salamat all, and we hope to see you soon.
Okay. Thank you, Christian. At I guess it's halos mag-aalas 4 na rin ng hapon. Maraming salamat sa lahat ng ating mga tagapanood, tagapakinig, at lahat ng mga sumabaybay. So ang ating webinar ngayon ay international kasi si Elma ay nasa Europa, di ba? Nandito naman ako sa China at mga kasama natin ay nasa Pilipinas. Okay? So, ito po ang perspective, interdisiplinaryong talakayan ng mga isyung napapanahon. Okay? Handog ng Kolehiyo ng 𝐏𝐚𝐠-𝐀𝐬𝐚 Filosofiya, Philippine Social Sciences Review, Department of Political Sciences, UP sa Halalan 2020. Maraming salamat at magandang hapon po sa ating lahat.
Thank you.